What if the Rendlesham Forest UFO was real? 3 American airmen walked into a pine forest on the eastern edge of England in the early hours of the 26th of December, 1980. The base they left behind was RAF Woodbridge, a Royal Air Force station leased to the United States Air Force. The Cold War was at its coldest point. Soviet submarines moved through the North Sea a few miles offshore. American nuclear warheads sat in hardened bunkers beneath the runways the airmen were paid to defend. Strange lights in the forest the night before were the reason for the patrol, lights that had fallen to the ground. Lights that had moved between the trees in a way that no aircraft, no helicopter, no flare, and no weather balloon could explain. A 27-year-old sergeant named Jim Penniston led the patrol that night. Penniston had been at RAF Woodbridge for 2 years. He had served in Korea, in Germany, and in Guam. Nothing in the sky he could not identify was something Penniston had ever seen. He would later say that what he saw in the forest that night changed the way he understood the word real. His patrol partner, Airman First Class John Burroughs, was 22. The third man, Airman First Class Larry Warren, was 19. All 3 would later file written statements about the same event. On the broad outline, the 3 statements would agree. On almost every detail, shortly before 1 in the morning on December 26, the patrol entered Rendlesham Forest, 1,000 acres of commercial pine, dense and dark, with logging tracks the patrol could drive along, was what the forest was. Penniston was in the lead vehicle. Driving, not flying, was what he was doing, but the language he would later use to describe what he saw was the language of aviation. A triangular craft was what he described. A yellow halo surrounding the bottom of the craft was what he described. A bright white light at the front of the craft was what he described. Roughly the size of a small aircraft, perhaps 2 to 3 meters across, sitting in a clearing between the trees was how he described the shape. Burroughs, in the second vehicle, told a different story. A metallic object with a smooth surface, no visible seams, no visible engine, no wings, no rotor, was what Burroughs described. In his words, completely silent was what the object was, Burroughs said later. Warren, in the third vehicle, had yet another version. A pulsing blue and red light moving through the trees, and then a stationary object that seemed to react to the patrol presence was what Warren described. All 3 of the men would, in separate statements given years later, describe the same general event. Out of the vehicles the men got, in defiance of his own training, Penniston approached the object. Not afraid, he said later, was how he felt. Curiosity, he said later, was what he felt. That the object did not react to his approach, and that he was able to walk to within a few meters of the object, was what he said. Lit from within was how the object was, he said later. On the side of the object, markings could be seen, he said. Not letters from any alphabet he recognized were the markings, he said. Like hieroglyphics they looked. Like symbols they looked. From the ground the object lifted, he said later. Through the trees without making a sound it moved, he said later. Disappeared it did, he said later. Back to the clearing the next morning Penniston went. A notebook with him he brought. Photographs he took. Sketches he made. A 16-page statement describing the event in detail he wrote. One of the most studied documents in the entire UFO literature, the notebook would later become. In Penniston's own handwriting, the pages describe the object, the markings, the sound, the way the object had moved. Drawings the pages also contained. Of the hieroglyphics Penniston claimed to have seen on the side of the object the drawings were, to investigators who later examined them, the drawings looked like nothing in any human alphabet. To some of the same investigators, the drawings looked like the kind of schematic that an engineer would draw to teach a system rather than to communicate a message. In a footlocker for nearly a decade, Penniston kept the notebook. Later, he would allow fragments of the notebook to be photographed. Selected pages to select researchers he would later allow to read. Never made public in its entirety was the notebook. never released, has the United States Air Force own investigation file on the Rendlesham incident. Never asked for the notebook has the Ministry of Defense. Or, if the Ministry of Defense has asked for the notebook, never made public was the request. 38 witnesses, including Penniston, Burroughs, Warren, and several other USAF personnel who came forward in the years after the incident, would eventually sign written statements. Often inconsistent in detail, the statements were almost entirely consistent on the central fact they were that something appeared in the forest on the night of the 26th of December 1980, and that the something moved and disappeared in a way that no known technology of the era could explain. 2 nights later, on the 28th of December 1980, the Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, led a second patrol into the forest. Not a UFO believer was Halt. A 30-year Air Force veteran with a master's degree in personnel management from Oklahoma City University was Halt. Assigned to RAF Woodbridge for a routine tour was Halt. A portable cassette recorder, a Geiger counter, and a yellow legal pad were what Halt carried into the forest. At approximately 10 o'clock at night, he and his patrol entered the forest. The same clearing Penniston had described the patrol found. Fresh indentations in the ground the patrol found. Broken branches on the trees surrounding the clearing the patrol found. On the recorder, Halt turned. On the Geiger counter, Halt turned. Into the recorder, Halt began dictating his observations. Approximately 18 minutes the recording runs, and Halt's voice can be heard on it. Strange lights in the sky, beams of light coming down from above, a glowing object moving between the trees, and high radiation readings on the Geiger counter near the indentations are what Halt describes. In the recording, 0.07 milliroentgens was the reading, Halt says. 0.02 to 0.05 was the background reading, he notes. Later, a 4-page memorandum to the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense Halt wrote, dated the 13th of January, 1981, the memorandum summarized the events of the 2 nights. The object, the memorandum described. The radiation readings, the memorandum described. The indentations, the memorandum described. Declassified and made public in the 1980s was the memorandum, called by researchers, journalists, and members of Parliament the most famous UFO document in the United Kingdom. Has the memorandum been? The morning after the second night, a small team from the base returned to the clearing with a different set of tools. At the time, Colonel Ted Conrad was the base commander, and the team had been ordered by him to take plaster casts of the indentations in the forest floor, soil samples, vegetation samples, and radiation readings the team also took. In a pattern, the indentations were arranged in the accounts given by Penniston, Burroughs, and Halt. To the men on the ground, the pattern looked like the marks that 3 landing legs would have made if a tripod of some kind had been set down. Approximately 2 inches deep, the indentations were. In soft soil beneath a layer of pine needles, the indentations sat. At the exact location the object had been observed, the indentations were. For a time, the plaster casts, like the notebook, were kept by the base. Like the notebook before them, the plaster casts were never released. The soil samples joined the plaster casts in silence. The vegetation samples followed the soil samples. The only physical evidence from the clearing that ever made it into the public record was the radiation readings. The readings Halt memorandum quotes. In part, the memorandum says the readings were 0.07 milliroentgens at the indentations against a background of 0.02 to 0.05 milliroentgens. What was emitting the radiation, the memorandum does not say. Whether the radiation has been analyzed, the memorandum does not say. Whether the source was ever identified, the memorandum does not say. In the 45 years since, never made public have the indentations, the soil, the vegetation, and the plaster casts. Known is not their current location. Known is not their chain of custody. Never released has the United States Air Force own internal investigation file. Since the 1950s, the British government had maintained a small internal office that collected reports of unexplained aerial sightings. Part of the Air Staff branch of the Ministry of Defense, the office was numbered DEFE 24/1948, was the file in which the office kept its records. By any measure, the most significant case in DEFE 24/1948 was the Rendlesham case. In stages, the file was declassified. The first batch in 2008 was released. The second batch in 2013 was released. Researchers who examined the released files discovered almost immediately that pages were missing. Whole pages, whole weeks. Gaps the files for late December 1980, the period that contained the Rendlesham event, had. Larger gaps the files for early January 1981, the period that should have contained Halt memorandum and the response to it, had. More gaps the files for the next several months had. Unusual the pattern of gaps was. Like the pattern of routine archival disposal, the pattern of gaps did not look. Like deliberate removal, the pattern looked, to researchers who had examined other declassified MOD files. Nick Pope, who had run the MOD UFO desk from 1991 to 1994, would later confirm the pattern. Not a fringe figure was Pope. A career civil servant was Pope. On a number of high-profile policy issues inside the MOD, Pope had worked. In interviews and in his books, that the Rendlesham case was one of the most significant events in the history of the British government. UFO files, Pope would later say. Pope later said the case was, in his own assessment, not a misidentification. Pope would also say the case was, in his own assessment, not a hoax. The missing pages in DEFE 24/1948 were, in Pope's own assessment, a deliberate attempt to remove information from the public record, he confirmed years later. From 1991 to 1994, Nick Pope's tenure at the MOD UFO desk ran. Decades earlier, the desk had been set up. No investigative authority, the desk had. No mandate to resolve cases, the desk had. Receive reports, log them in a file, and provide a courtesy reply was the mandate the desk had. In one form or another, until 2009, the desk ran. In 2009, the Ministry of Defense announced that the desk would be closed. The official reason given was that the desk served no purpose, because no UFO report had ever produced evidence of a threat to the United Kingdom. The unofficial reason, given by people who had worked at the desk over the years, was that the desk had become an embarrassment. In the years after 2009, the subject of multiple books, multiple documentaries, multiple parliamentary questions, and a wave of Freedom of Information Act requests was the Rendlesham case. Subject of a 2025 documentary at the Raindance Film Festival, narrated by William B. Davis, the actor who played the cigarette-smoking man on The X-Files, the case has been titled Rendlesham UFO, the British Well the documentary is. Interviews with Penniston, Burroughs, Halt, Pope, and a number of other witnesses and investigators, the documentary features. In the words of its own promotional material, the documentary makes the case that the Rendlesham event is the most significant UFO case in the history of the United Kingdom. Not closed has the case been. Not solved has the case been. In the 45 years since the night in the forest, never officially explained by the United Kingdom government, by the United States government, or by any independent scientific body, has the case been. The 26th of December 1980. The 28th of December 1980. 2 nights in a pine forest on the eastern edge of England. A triangular craft with hieroglyphics on its side was what 3 American airmen saw. To the same clearing 2 nights later, the deputy base commander took a Geiger counter, and where the craft had been the counter, read 0.07 milliroentgens. Plaster casts of the indentations the base commander ordered. From the base, the casts vanished. So did the soil samples. So did the notebook Penniston had kept in his footlocker. To the British Ministry of Defence, the memorandum describing the events was sent. In 2008 and 2013, the file in which the memorandum should be kept was declassified. Missing were pages. That the pages were deliberately removed, Nick Pope, who ran the desk from 1991 to 1994, confirmed. In 2009, the desk was closed by a 2025 documentary narrated by William B. Davis, the cigarette-smoking man from the X-Files. The case is the subject. In December 2026, the case will mark its 46th anniversary. Never officially explained has the case been. Never closed has the case been. In the 45 years since, 38 witness statements, 400 pages of declassified documents, 2 feature-length documentaries, 4 published books, and 1 wave of parliamentary questions in Westminster has the case produced. In the same 45 years, 1 set of missing pages has the case produced. The only physical record in the entire Rendlesham file that has been confirmed to have been removed is the missing pages. Not the only record that is missing are the pages. Missing is the notebook. Missing are the plaster casts. Missing are the soil samples. Missing is the USAF investigation file. Missing is the chain of custody for every physical piece of evidence from the clearing. Not whether something was in the forest is the question that remains. 38 witnesses, 3 radiation readings, 4 missing pages, and 1 yellow legal pad say something was. What the people who removed the missing pages knew that the rest of us do not is the question that remains.